After the GameCube remake of the original Resident Evil, fans asked for years about the potential of getting a similar reimagining for the undisputed fan favorite entry of the time, Resident Evil 2. And we would find out from interviews years later that Capcom Corporate was actually very interested in making one, but series producer Shinji Mikami repeatedly turned down the idea as he didn't want to take more resources away from Resident Evil 4, which was a good few years into development at this point, and he just felt that the project needed to be done. But after years and years of fans begging only to feel like a remake would never come, producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi would announce that a full-blown reimagining of Resident Evil 2 was in development as part of Capcom's plan to return to the roots of the series following the negative reception of Resident Evil 6. This announcement came only 2 months after the initial showcases and announcement of Resident Evil 7 at E3 2015, leaving many longtime fans excited, albeit a bit skeptical of Capcom's ability to bring the series back to its glory days. Resident Evil 7 would come out in early 2017, and we've already covered that game in its own video, but the Resident Evil 2 remake would eventually be released in January of 2019. The question is though, did Capcom manage to recapture what made the original so special while also improving on it using more than 20 years of new lessons and experience in developing this franchise? Well, that's a pretty complicated question to answer, but let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 26th in a series of videos where I'm playing and reviewing every single game in the Resident Evil franchise in release order. You don't have to have seen the other videos in the series in order to enjoy this one, but I would of course recommend that you've seen my video on the original Resident Evil 2 if you're looking for more context on the main game, or just my thoughts on it. Just be warned that I had a mean case of COVID while I made that video, so my voice is a bit rough in it. So for those of you who are interested in checking out that, or just the rest of the series in general, I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below. But with that out of the way, Resident Evil 2 is a survival horror game developed and published by Capcom for the PlayStation 4, PC, and Xbox One in 2019. As mentioned before, this is a remake of the original Resident Evil 2 from 1998, and as such, we once again play as rookie cop Leon Kennedy or college student Claire Redfield as they arrive in Raccoon City in the midst of a massive T-virus outbreak. The game recreates the story of the original in a way that is very accurate to the source material, albeit with some slight differences that we'll get into later in the video. But generally speaking, this is the story of Resident Evil 2 almost exactly as you'll remember it from the PS1 version. As such, you'll be revisiting all of the iconic locations from the original. The streets of Raccoon City, the Raccoon City Police Department, the sewers beneath the station, and of course, Umbrella's secret underground lab. And as you might expect, with a 21-year gap between the release of the original and the remake, all of these locations have gotten quite the makeover here. The perspective has been switched from the classic fixed camera angles with pre-rendered backgrounds to a third-person perspective with fully 3D environments, and this changes the way that we experience these iconic locations quite a bit. That being said though, they look phenomenal. Capcom made some pretty great use of their new RE engine here, and have even improved their use of it quite a bit from what we saw in Resident Evil 7. Textures and materials have had their quality noticeably increased, the lighting is still outstanding, and a lot of those little engine quirks that we saw in RE7 have been made much less noticeable here. The aliasing issues that were present there are almost entirely fixed now, and things like hair physics and facial animations feel like they've jumped an entire generation in the span of just 2 years. There are still some quirks that haven't been fixed, with the awful screen space reflections being even more noticeable here in RE2, especially in the RPD's main hall or on the surface of the water in the sewers, but this is the only real technical issue that's present here. Aside from the reflections, the environments in this game look amazing, and my only real complaint comes down to an artistic decision that was made. That being that I just feel like the game looks a bit dull a lot of the time. This isn't because there's no color in this game, as there's plenty, and some areas feel more than properly saturated. But I would say that maybe like 80% of this game's rooms just could have used a little more color. Color is one of those things that can quickly and easily make an area stand out and feel distinct from the others, so I just wish that they would have made some of those differences a bit more noticeable here. I think this was done as part of them trying to make these locations feel much darker and more heavily atmospheric than they were in the original Resident Evil 2, as the RPD was quite bright in that game, and this would be pretty similar to what we saw them do with the remake of RE1 and the Spencer Mansion in that game. Which I absolutely love, by the way. I think the RPD looks amazing here, and this was definitely the right general direction to go in, but I just don't personally like how dull some of the areas within it feel here. Now, let's get back to that third-person perspective, as this is one of the most interesting parts of the remake. Much like what happened with RE7's first-person perspective, the reveal of this remake being in third person was met with a solid amount of pushback from old-school fans. Many were worried that this meant RE2 was going to become a full-blown action game like RE4, 5, and 6 were, which, in all honesty, was a valid concern, seeing as every third-person game in the franchise up to this point has been an action horror game. But thankfully, this wasn't the case, as much like RE7 before it, the RE2 remake has managed to take a perspective that's typically associated with heavy action and masterfully blend it with survival horror design. There are numerous ways in which Capcom has accounted for things like being able to freely aim with the mouse and keyboard, and all other parts of this new perspective that would typically trivialize the survival horror gameplay, but we'll dive into those more as we get deeper into the gameplay. Choosing a third-person perspective instead of just reusing RE7's first person was also a great idea in at least keeping things feeling a bit closer to the spirit of the original. Like, sure, we may not have the fixed cameras anymore, and that already changes the feel of the game a lot. But at the very least, we can still see our characters and how they interact with the world at all times, which goes a lot further than you might initially think it does. This also allowed them to really flex just how smooth their animation work has become since the days of the PS1, as the character animations in this game were easily some of the best that we had ever seen in gaming at the time. Although, I've always felt that Claire's walking animations feel a bit weird in this one. I've never really been able to put my finger on why, but it just looks really stiff to me, and almost like she's trying really hard to keep her balance while walking around. And that's not even mentioning that when she's holding a weapon with one hand, her arm will clip through her equipment on her belt, and even just sometimes straight through her leg, which doesn't happen to Leon at all in this game. So it just makes Claire's animations feel a bit more rushed and unfinished by comparison. Oh, and there's also this one animation where the characters pull a lever in this game, and for both characters, the weapon in their hand will disappear while they're doing so. Sorry, my nitpicky asshole is showing. The sound design and the use of directional audio in this game is also just outstanding. Like, seriously, I can't praise it enough. All the faint little sounds that you'll hear as you move throughout the station, like the howling wind from outside a window, the distant sound of a zombie bashing against a door, or the hiss of a licker down the hall hoping to find its next victim. They all just add so much to the atmosphere and make it incredibly easy to become fully immersed in the experience. And my first time going through the sewers while recording for this video actually made me get up from my PC thinking that there was a water leak in my house because of just how faint and realistic the sound of distant dripping water was in my right ear. And this is something that I've never really talked about in my other RE videos up to this point, but I have to talk about it here because the environmental storytelling in RE2 Remake is also phenomenal. There are so many pieces of set dressing that you might just walk past without realizing, but that if you happen to notice, they immediately give you a strong idea of what happened in that area. But they do so without ever directly showing it to you as you walk through, allowing your imagination to run wild a little bit as you move through the station. There's things like that first hallway where the licker appears in the original, having had the licker removed so that they could be revealed later on in the game instead. But in place of that liquor, they've put in a corpse that's had its face cut wide open, another corpse that's hanging from a broken pipe on the ceiling, and large claw marks all over the walls, making for an awesome little set piece for fans of the original, and allowing newer players to wonder what possibly could have done all this, since it clearly wasn't just the zombies. There are so many examples of this, like the fat zombie that you'll find banging on the vending machine, subtly suggesting that some aspect of a zombie's humanity remains after they've turned, or all of the welcome signs and party decorations that were put up for Leon in the offices, which just makes you wonder how much different the energy in this room would have been today had the outbreak not occurred. I could keep going for at least 10 minutes here, but the point is that the developers really went all out with the environmental storytelling, and I love when horror games leave just a little bit to the imagination, so this is a huge positive for me. Overall, aside from some hiccups that are fairly minor in the grand scheme of things, the presentation is fantastic in this game. But of course, good presentation only matters if the game itself is actually good, so how's the gameplay? Well, thankfully, it's also really damn good. Like I mentioned a minute ago, this is a survival horror game through and through, so you'll be going through that classic Resident Evil loop of arriving in a location with nothing but a handgun and a few bullets to defend yourself with, and finding that almost all of the doors and pathways are locked off. But as you start exploring, you'll slowly start solving puzzles and finding key items that let you progress through the game, all while finding healing items, new weapons, and ammunition to defend yourself with. And combat is present, but the only actual reward for killing an enemy is that it simply makes a room safer to move through in the future, as you will not be given any ammo or healing items as a direct reward for disposing of enemies in this game, and will only have burned through some of your limited supply in order to do so. But of course, not disposing of an enemy in order to save some ammo risks you taking damage from them when trying to run by, meaning that classic survival horror balancing act is still very much intact here, as engaging with enemies essentially means choosing between two options, which both result in the player having less supplies than before. And thankfully, considerations have been taken into account to maintain the pacing and old-school feel of survival horror within this perspective as well. Things like having an inertia system in place that makes your movement feel incredibly realistic and grounded, with it taking a second or so to actually get up to your full walking or running speed after standing still, or taking a second or so to fully stop when transitioning from running or walking to standing still. There's also a massive change to how you would expect the headshots to work here, with headshots actually dealing the exact same damage to the zombies as a body shot does. That might sound like a terrible idea given the perspective and controls of this game, but what they've done instead of adding a damage modifier is just add a small chance to land a critical shot whenever hitting the head that will instantly kill the zombie just like in the classic entries. The zombies have also taken a cue from RE7's Molded and stumble and wobble around in a very unnatural and unpredictable fashion, which makes it pretty difficult to actually land a headshot, even on mouse and keyboard. And to prevent players from moving all over the place while shooting, they also added a mechanic where your accuracy will be very low when you first raise your weapon, but allowing you to tighten the reticle by standing still for a second or two. And if you wait until your crosshair fully closes in, you'll raise your chance of landing a critical shot and deal higher damage per shot. So you could play this like an action game and move around while just spam firing your weapon, but doing so will heavily punish you and quickly leave you with no remaining ammo to deal with enemies. Whereas if you take it slow and treat it like it's one of those classic era tank control entries, you'll be very handsomely rewarded. It is worth noting though that Claire gets an upgraded handgun about halfway through her playthrough that has an RE4 style laser sight on it. And this thing is absolutely insane, as it gets the full damage modifier and critical shot rate at all times, regardless of movement. So in the later half of a Claire run, yeah, you can start getting a lot more aggressive should you choose to do so. It's just one weapon though, and it gives this handgun in particular a very unique personality and role in the game compared to the others, so I don't really see it as a negative, despite being a classic RE fanboy. Aside from its core gameplay though, the Resident Evil 2 remake pretty much just takes a lot of the best elements of various prior survival horror entries and blends them all together into one of the most satisfying experiences from the entire series. For example, the super smooth inventory from RE7 has been pulled pretty much right over here, albeit with some minor improvements, like how when you pick up an item, it will briefly open your inventory overlay and allow you to place it wherever you want, or even just combine it with something else as you pick it up. And of course, Capcom looked back at the remake of RE1 for reference a lot during this game's development, and that obviously led to a lot of good for the project overall. The areas of RE2 have been totally reworked, similar to what we saw in Remake, with pretty much every room you remember from the original still being there, but sometimes they've been reworked for better flow with the newer areas, so they might be smaller, larger, or in a slightly different place than you remember for the sake of flow. But fans of the original will still have a ton of those moments where you walk into a room and just go, "Oh yeah, the library, man, the memories in here." The only major exception to this is the factory area from the original, which has actually been cut entirely from the remake. You'd think I would be super upset about this given how much of an RE2 fan I am, but seeing as that was literally a 5-minute area in the original, its exclusion here doesn't really affect much of anything. And while it's not something that the game borrows from a prior title, since we're on the topic, now is also a good time to mention that the level design here is easily the best we've seen from the franchise since Remake back in 2002. Everything is super sectioned off at first, but as you progress, the amount of ways that areas start to link between each other and open up more routes and shortcuts through the station is really awesome, and just makes getting around while backtracking much quicker and easier. The rate of progression through the areas is also just about perfect, and even in the B scenarios when they start remixing the item placements and the way that you'll navigate through the map, things feel damn near perfect there too. I've actually been playing the RE1 remake extensively on stream lately while trying to get all the achievements on my Steam account, and I would venture to say that the level design in RE2 remake is even better than that game's. But honestly, it is so close that you could easily sway me to either side of the argument there. My only real issue with it is the sewer section, which is now roughly twice as long as it was in the original, without really being any more fun or interesting than it was before, which is a major misstep as the sewers have always notoriously been the part of RE2 where the pacing got pretty rough. RE1 Remake did the exact same thing to the caves in that game though, so history really does repeat itself, I guess. Something else that I really love about the level design changes is that they've shuffled around the placement of a lot of those iconic key moments and events from the original. For example, that iconic scene where the liquor first appears in a hallway shortly after you arrive at the RPD has been moved to a different hallway on the second floor of the RPD that will take you probably an hour or so to get to. So players familiar with the original will enter that first hallway expecting the liquor encounter, only to find that scene that I described a few minutes ago. And then when they do encounter a liquor somewhere else about an hour later, it will naturally surprise them. This is just one example, as this is something that the remake does a lot, and I absolutely adore it. It makes the remake feel like a totally fresh experience, even for those of us who have played the original more times than we can count over the years. And when this game came out back in 2019, this was a large part of what made me fall in love with RE2 all over again. Getting back to things that 2 Remake took from prior titles though, the defense items from Remake have finally made their return, although there are some key differences here. Rather than sitting in their own little spot in your inventory and not taking up any space, defense items now take one of your precious few inventory slots, making it more of an actual decision on whether you want to take one with you or not. The items themselves are actually the exact same as Remake, with you being able to find knives, flash grenades, and frag grenades to use as defense items, and just like back then, you can use them to prevent taking damage from an enemy by simply pressing a single button when pinned down by one. However, one major twist here is that these aren't exclusively used for self-defense anymore. as you can now actively use them as weapons of their own as well. So for the grenades, this means that you can simply throw them out as a single-use item, but for the knives, it's a little more interesting. Using a knife in combat will slowly wear away at its durability, with the knife obviously breaking when the durability hits 0. And you can actually take your knife back out of an enemy after killing them if you use one, but using it as a defense item will burn about half of its durability in just one use. So you aren't really able to stretch them out that much further. It's a really interesting evolution of the system, although admittedly, I tend to use them just as classic defense items rather than as weapons of their own. Still, I'm super glad to see the defense items return here, and I'm sure there are plenty of players better than me who could tell you all about their valuable uses outside of just being defense items. I'm just a bit of a scrub. Keeping the ball rolling with things they took from Remake, which, to be fair, I did warn you was a lot, the map system in this game is amazing. They took the feature from Remake where the rooms will change colors on the map based on whether you found every item in that room or not, and even taken that idea a bit further by marking items that you walked right past for you, so that if you basically walked right up against it and just somehow missed it, you can at least just glance at the map now and decide whether it's worth backtracking for or not. It also now clearly labels which keys open what doors so long as you've actually gone up and touched that door, and in the event of other, more specific key items being needed, it puts down this little marker that will tell you what it was when you hover over it, making it much easier to figure out where you need to go and what you need to use to progress in the event that you get lost or stuck. So overall, it's a great evolution of Remake's map design, and is hands down the best and easiest to read map out of the entire franchise. Next, they also brought back the gunpowder system from Resident Evil 3. This was present in RE7 in a way, but you couldn't actually craft many different ammo types, and it was all dependent on finding those chemicals, which were also used to create healing items, so it wasn't quite the same. Here though, we're back to just combining different types of gunpowder to create nearly any type of ammo, except now they've removed the need for that crafting tool that was in RE3, which honestly is a massive improvement, seeing as any reasonable player would just stick that crafting tool in the item box and only pull it out for 10 seconds to craft some ammo real quick before putting it back, so it didn't really add anything to the game by being there. I'm always a fan of these ammo crafting systems and the extra depth and strategy that they add to your resource management, so bringing back the original gunpowder system with a key improvement as well is naturally a big win in my book. RE2 Remake also takes a page out of Resident Evil 4's book and uses an adaptive difficulty system, but if you ask me, the implementation of it here is way better than it ever was in RE4. If you're not familiar with what this means, the simplest way to explain it is that there's a system that runs in the background of the game and keeps track of how well you're doing as you play through it. If at any point the system determines that you're doing too well and the game is too easy for you, it will start to subtly raise the difficulty without you knowing by doing things like making enemies take an extra bullet or two before going down, slightly increasing the damage you take, making the enemies a little more aggressive, just small things that will put a bit more pressure on you without you really noticing that anything is changing. And of course, it goes the other way too. Meaning that if you're really struggling and having a hard time getting through the game, it will swing the other way and make enemies a bit weaker in hopes that you can get back on track. I've seen a lot of people complain about these systems in both RE4 and 2 Remake over the years, as they don't feel like they should be punished for doing well, but I just don't see it that way. The game isn't punishing you for doing well, it's just ensuring that the proper level of challenge is maintained throughout your playthrough. These games are designed to be difficult and to feel like oppressive horror experiences, and all types of players have various levels of skill that go beyond just 3 looser difficulty settings. So having a subtle system in place that makes sure all players get the exact amount of pressure put on them that they need to in order to feel that difficulty is a good thing in my opinion, and means that everyone will get that experience that the developers intended regardless of their individual skill level. And it was great when I was recording for this video because I've played a lot of RE2 Remake over the years, so playing on just the standard difficulty for the sake of judging the game the way I've been judging all the others initially felt way too easy for me. So much so that I went a little over 2 hours without taking a single point of damage at the start. But around that 2-hour mark, the game realized that I had been absolutely blasting through the experience so far, and adjusted things to make sure that even though I'm a veteran of this game with nearly 100 hours played in it, I was still being properly challenged and feeling that difficulty that the developers wanted me to. It caught me super off guard since I'm used to playing the game on the hardcore mode, so I expected this to be a much easier playthrough than usual, but I absolutely loved that the game was still able to push me in that way, and it definitely kept me more engaged for the duration of my playthrough. And bringing it back to RE7 again, you start out with 8 inventory slots, just like the original RE2 here, but you'll slowly get incremental increases to your inventory size as you go. Pretty much identical to what we saw in Resident Evil 7. I love having these smaller upgrades scattered throughout the entire game, rather than just having one larger upgrade at one specific point, as it really helps keep players engaged for longer when they feel like they're just constantly finding these game-changing upgrades. The only thing that I don't love about it is that you get so much inventory space by the end of this game that it allows you to carry all of your weapons at once, plus ammo for said weapons, and still have plenty of space for everything else. In fairness, this is probably just because of my preference for classic RE gameplay, and my belief that needing to choose only 1 or 2 weapons depending on what threats you're dealing with definitely makes for more tense and engaging gameplay, and being able to just pull out the best weapon for any situation at any time kind of takes away from that careful planning of the originals. But it does make it a lot easier for newer players to pick up the game and get really into it, and I'm sure there are plenty out there who disagree. So just chalk this one up to personal preference. Similarly, and moving into things that are totally new additions to the remake, the upgrades for Leon's weapons have been cut up into multiple individual parts that you'll find throughout the game, rather than just one large upgrade kit for every weapon. So instead of finding one crate that fully upgrades his Matilda handgun, you'll now find the extended magazine, the stock, and the compensator all separately as you progress through the game. Meaning that, again, you get a bunch of little permanent upgrades scattered throughout the game, rather than just a couple of larger permanent upgrades, which I think helps a lot with the pacing. And that's not even all of it, because along with the upgrades for Leon's weapons that always got upgrades in the original, you'll also now find parts to upgrade his flamethrower with, which is totally new, as well as being able to find a bunch of parts to upgrade all of Claire's weapons during her playthrough, which was never a thing in the original. Along with that, she's the one who gets that extra handgun with the laser sight that I mentioned before, meaning that she even gets a totally new handgun as she progresses here. And that's not even all of it, because her starting pistol then gets a barrel shortly after that allows the player to load special high-caliber rounds into it, effectively converting her weaker starting handgun into a magnum for her to use in the late game. This is obviously awesome, as Claire didn't even have those permanent upgrades in her portion of the original, so seeing her get the same love here is just great. And easily one of the coolest additions in the remake is that normal zombies can now break through doors to chase you between rooms. So if a zombie is after you and you try to run into the next room to get away from it and save some ammo like you're used to in the classic RE games, there's a solid chance that that zombie is just going to bust through the door and continue to chase you. The only other time we've seen anything like this from the series was with Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, but his instances of this behavior were always hard scripted, whereas the zombies in this game are seemingly able to do this anywhere at any time, which is really awesome. Something else that I can't believe took this long to be added to the series is that there's actually a new effect that they've added for mixing all 3 herb types together. In prior titles, the green herb would heal you, mixing the red and the green herbs together would triple the healing effect of the green herb, turning it into a full heal item, and the blue herb would simply cure poison. You could mix the green, red, and blue herbs all together, but doing so would grant no additional effect, and this combination would simply heal you, while also curing any poison effect that you might have when you use it. But in the RE2 remake, they've added a new defensive buff to a combination of all three, meaning you'll take less damage from enemies and be granted full immunity to poison effects for a short time after consuming it. Like I said before, this is an amazing addition, and I genuinely just can't believe that it took them this long to implement something like it, as it now finally gives a purpose to those piles and piles of blue herbs that you'll have by the end of the game. And one that made me really happy as a fan of the original RE2 is the addition of these wooden boards that you can find throughout the RPD. In the remake, zombies will spawn outside of the windows and try to break in to repopulate the halls and keep things threatening for players who are backtracking just like the original. But now, these wooden boards act as a counter to this. Careful players can find these boards and then take them to windows that have been left uncovered to board them up and prevent zombies from breaking through and filling that hallway again. And what I really love about this is that you could leave the windows unboarded and just have the RPD repopulate like it did in the original. Or you could take the extra couple minutes to walk back to a window and board it up before the zombies ever even try to break in. It incentivizes a slower and more careful approach without outright eliminating one of the coolest things about the RPD from the original. So it's a really cool addition in my opinion. And I can't believe that I've managed to go this long without talking about it, but we have to talk about the T-103 here, more commonly known by the fandom as Mr. X. This is another one of those instances where they've shuffled around an iconic moment from the original, as Mr. X now appears in the A scenarios as well as in the B scenarios, which, believe me, scared the hell out of me when he first appeared back in 2019. But that's not necessarily the reason that we have to talk specifically about him here. Rather, that would be because he's been turned into a genuine stalker enemy similar to Jack Baker from RE7. Once Mr. X is brought into play, he'll patrol throughout the RPD trying to find the player, and if he does manage to find you, he'll chase you down and try to kill you until you manage to shake him off again. And in my opinion, he's utilized much better than Jack Baker was in 7. Simply because the area that he has to search for you in is much wider and the level design features a lot more convenient loops and shortcuts once you've opened up the station, and also the fact that he's actually present for more of the game than Jack ever was. And because he's always present after his arrival to the RPD, he adds even more consideration to whether or not you deal with the enemies throughout the station instead of just trying to run past them, as any gunshots will quickly draw his attention and potentially give you away. They've also made great use of the 3D audio in this engine with him by giving him some absolutely thunderous footsteps that you can hear echoing through the halls of the station whenever he's nearby, which, believe me, never fails to ramp up the tension. And in the event that you do try to kill him in order to get a big ammo drop like in the original, well, you're going to be pretty disappointed, as there's no reward for actually taking him down anymore. This completely disincentivizes engaging with him, and turns him into the second genuine stalker enemy that we've seen from the franchise, and I absolutely love this change for him. As much as his original appearance is iconic, this is just far more interesting from a gameplay perspective, and really just fits better with the overall design of the remake in my opinion. Plus, they gave him a little fedora to better reflect the fact that he's supposed to be an infiltration unit, but I mean, come on, that fedora is not hiding anything. This guy is like 9 feet tall and has gray skin. Jokes aside though, I wanted to save this last general section for the very end, because this is probably the part of the game that I have the strongest feelings on. And not to get too far ahead of myself, but it's easily my biggest negative with the game as well. The original Resident Evil 2 introduced us to multiple unique scenarios in a Resident Evil title, with 2 A scenarios where either Leon or Claire arrived at the RPD first, and then a subsequent 2 B scenarios where you play as Claire or Leon and see what they were doing during the prior A scenario. This gave the original RE2 a lot of variety, as the B scenarios totally changed the item placements and general progression through the game, and all 4 scenarios would add different twists on the story and different ways that the events could play out, meaning that if you wanted to see all the different story content, you had 4 full playthroughs worth of different versions of the same general events. Here in the RE2 remake though, the A and B scenarios are still here, except now they're simply labeled as just New Game and Second Run respectively. Second Run still sees us playing as the opposite character that we initially played as after they arrive at the RPD a while after the first, and the changes to progression and item placements are all still there, making these feel meaningfully different from a gameplay standpoint. But the thing is, those unique story changes and different versions of events are no longer present in the remake. Regardless of which character arrives at the station first, you'll see all the same cutscenes when you play as Leon in New Game that you will in his second run, and the same goes for Claire.
I don't like the sound of that.
There are a handful of cutscenes right at the start of a New Game playthrough that are slightly different just by the nature of a different character being there, but aside from slight dialogue changes, these are also the same. And every cutscene past like the first 5 or so are exactly the same in either the A or the B scenario. This is not only incredibly disappointing, as the B scenarios were one of the coolest parts of the original and a big piece of what made the game so replayable, but also because it just feels like there wasn't much effort put into making the story feel coherent overall. Regardless of what playthrough you're on, in all 4 of the remake's scenarios, you'll encounter a lot of the same bosses in the same room at the same point in the story, which is obviously a huge continuity issue. Let's say you play Leon's New Game first, and then start Claire's second run after. It is incredibly jarring when you fight William Birkin in the same exact spot at the same exact moment in the story, and obviously, from an in-universe standpoint, one of them has to have actually fought him here, but they can't have both fought him here. And these fights aren't the only continuity issues present in the story either. Also, regardless of which playthrough comes first or second, there's a massive contradiction near the end with Annette Birkin's death. Claire will always meet her first down in the lab, and during this encounter, a mutated William Birkin will break through the ceiling, mortally wound Annette, and Claire will be lowered down with him on a lift to fight him while Annette goes to bring a cure for the G-Virus to Sherry on the other side of the lab. After Claire defeats Birkin here, she'll walk over to the other side of the lab, and there's a short reunion with her, Sherry, and Annette. And during this reunion, Annette will eventually succumb to her injuries and bleed out on the floor with them there. While this is happening though, an alarm is set off because Leon is back over on the other side of the lab and just grabbed a sample of the G-Virus without authorization. And when Leon leaves the room after doing this, he also encounters Annette Birkin in the same room as before, right before a mutated William Birkin breaks through the ceiling and mortally wounds her. Leon is then lowered down on a lift to fight him while Annette rests on the floor. After this though, Leon has his confrontation with Ada where he finds out that she's not who she says she is, before Annette shows up out of nowhere to shoot her before succumbing to her injuries and bleeding out on the floor. And the way that the story is portrayed here in the remake, we're supposed to believe that somehow all of these things are supposed to happen exactly as we see them. As if they didn't, then the events of this story would play out very differently and have a much different effect on the overall series lore than they do. So not only are there no longer 4 different versions of RE2's events that we can see across these playthroughs, but even in the story that we are presented with, there are continuity errors and self-contradictions like this everywhere, which is why I say that it feels like not a lot of effort went into making this a coherent story. On top of that, the awesome zapping system from the original is also gone, so your actions in the first playthrough will no longer have any effect on the second, which, again, was one of the coolest parts of playing both characters' scenarios in the original. These things not being present in the remake made playing through all 4 scenarios back to back for this video feel like an absolute slog due to the lack of variety, whereas when I recorded all 4 back to back for my video on the original, I had an absolute blast the entire time because there was always something new. There are other smaller factors here, like how Mr. X being in all 4 scenarios rather than just 2 only makes them feel more samey, but if I sat here and listed them all, we'd be here for at least 10 more minutes of ranting. So in the interest of time, I'll just say that the entire second run system in the remake completely fails to recapture what made the A and B scenarios of the original feel special. And in my eyes, this is the single largest failure of this remake. At the very least though, the story is fantastically handled aside from the issues introduced by the second run system. The voice acting in this game is incredible across the board, and by far the best that we've seen from the entire franchise up to this point, and everyone's characterization here is damn near perfect. Leon is still a naive rookie cop, but they've mixed in a little more of that wisecracking attitude that he would become known for with Resident Evil 4. But thankfully, it's a lot less annoying than it was in RE4, and actually feels believable here.
Chew on that, you overgrown son of a bitch.
Claire feels a bit more rough around the edges than she did in the original, but she's still very caring with Sherry and even has some very believable emotional outbursts that end up making her probably the most relatable character in the series. Ada Wong's entire reason for being here has been changed from a woman trying to find her boyfriend to an FBI agent investigating the incident, making her feel much more interesting right from her introduction, and making it much more believable that Leon would choose to ally himself with her so quickly, despite not really knowing who she is. The way that she pretends to fall in love with Leon in order to use him for her own benefit here also feels leagues more believable than it did in the original, largely thanks to some small changes in her writing, alongside an amazing performance from her voice actress here. I could keep going, but the point is, pretty much every major character from the original returns and feels even more well written and interesting than they ever did before, even the ones who have had some significant changes made like Ada. It's really good stuff, and despite being a diehard fan of the original, I have zero complaints about the way they handled the characters here. Overall though, as if it wasn't obvious enough, I really do enjoy the Resident Evil 2 remake. Story issues and lacking B scenarios aside, it manages to take one of the most beloved titles in not just this series, but even the entire horror genre, and recreate that experience for the modern day, while also improving on so much of it. The visuals, the atmosphere, the story, and especially the gameplay all just come together to make an experience that is easily one of the standouts among the entire Resident Evil catalog. And despite my issues that I have with this title, some of them being pretty major issues, the gameplay and level design in this one is just so damn good that I can't help but fall in love with it every time I come back to replay it. So much so that this is actually the second title in the franchise that sits among my top 3. Yeah, I know, a lot of you just thought I had forgotten about including this little list along the way, but no, it just took this long for us to reach the second of the 3, which is now probably terrifying a lot of you watching thinking about what the third can be, but we'll get there when we get there. The Resident Evil 2 remake was incredibly successful, with longtime fans like myself largely being more than happy with it, and a massive amount of new players getting into Resident Evil for the first time through this title. It's been so successful over the last few years, in fact, that while it isn't the Resident Evil game that's sold the most copies just yet, it's very much on track to achieve that title at some point in the next few years. And this massive success would go on to kick off the modern remake craze that we've seen in the gaming industry for the last few years, and will likely still see for years to come. And regardless of how you feel about that trend in general, it has to at least be respected that this game did such a good job at recreating a legendary piece of gaming history that it inspired developers across the industry to attempt the same with their own legendary titles. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Resident Evil 2 a 9 out of 10. That's going to wrap up this video, but do be sure to check out my other Resident Evil videos if you haven't already, or if you're looking to branch out a bit, maybe check out the series we've been doing where I'm playing every Yakuza game for the first time. Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to our channel members and patrons who make series like this one possible. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, and especially leave a comment to help out with the algorithm, as comments help out way more than anything else the way that YouTube works right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and I hope to see all of you right back here for the next Resident Evil review.